Former President Trump made his big return to Capitol Hill last week, and Republicans rolled out the red carpet. Trump's visit marked his first stop at the Capitol since the January 6th attack, and his first time as a convicted felon. But that didn't stop Republican lawmakers from lining up to shake hands with Trump, showing a unified front behind the party's presumptive presidential nominee.
We have great unity. We have great common sense. A lot of very smart people in this room, and a lot of people that love our country. They love our country beyond just about all else.
Meanwhile, President Biden's campaign is seizing on Trump's guilty verdict in his New York hush money case, running a new $50 million ad campaign that targets Trump as a convicted criminal. With just over a week away until the first presidential debate, we are starting to see glimpses of how the debate will play out. It's time to go on the record with the Director of Data Science from Decision Desk HQ, Scott Tranter. Scott, as always, it's great to see you. I want to dive into some new polling from the Des Moines Register that has Trump with a nearly 20-point lead over Biden in Iowa. Now, we know Iowa is obviously a red state, but this is a pretty big gap. Are these numbers a surprise to the Biden campaign and their supporters?
Yeah, they should be a surprise. I mean, I don't think there's any question. Well, there's very little question that Iowa is going to go for Trump this fall. I think the gap is what's catching everyone's attention, because Iowa is very similar to Minnesota, which, as you know, Minnesota in our polling average and our forecast appears to be a battleground. So yeah, no, it's a number to be concerned with. There's a lot of inference there. Because again, Iowa's not exactly the state we're doing. They're trying to extrapolate it out to a couple other states, but it is something from a very good pollster that the Biden campaign should be paying attention to.
So that same poll found that while Trump is holding a comfortable lead in Iowa, 58% of independent women in Iowa have an unfavorable view of Trump. Scott, do you think this could be an indicator of how the former president stands with women across the country if he's polling this way in Iowa?
Yeah, and we see that among independent women in other polls in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan. But it is an artifact of, Donald Trump's approval rating as well as Joe Biden's approval rating are underwater. So you're going to have a near plurality, if not majority, disapproval among a lot of different groups, simply because both these candidates aren't liked very much. That one section, independent women in the suburbs, though, that is something you see the Donald Trump campaign trying to address. Whether or not they're going to be able to is a different question, but that is going to be an influential slice of voters. I don't know that he can necessarily expect to flip that and get 60% of their approval rating, but he needs to slim that up a little bit, because that is an angle of campaign attack that Joe Biden's going to use.
Definitely some pluses and minuses from that Des Moines Register poll. So I want to move to a new poll from Politico that shows 21% of independents are less likely to vote for Trump after his criminal conviction. Once again, Scott, this is Trump having issues with independents. How much of a role could his conviction play in the presidential election when it comes to these independent voters that we talk so much about?
Look, they're small slices of the electorate, but we're looking at a coin flip race where small slices of the electorate are going to make a difference. It's interesting. We're seeing a little bit, I would call this a tidbit piece of data. It's good. It's a good slice of data, showing how some of these groups are moving. But what I would point out is the top lines where people actually say how they're going to vote largely has not moved post-conviction. The only state that's moved a little bit, and it's still well in coin flip territory, is Michigan. Other than that, Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, two key states for both these candidates, have stayed in Donald Trump's column. Now, we'll see what happens after next week's debate, but we're seeing a lot of these things like you're talking about below the surface, but they're not exactly translating to the top line, which is what really matters.
So new polling released by USA Today, we're really hitting all the polls today, shows support among Black voters in the critical swing states of Pennsylvania and Michigan for Biden. Support from that group in those states has declined from 2020. How is the Biden campaign addressing these numbers, and could Black voter turnout play a deciding factor on Election Day?
Yeah, no, we see the Biden campaign actually, quite a few of their campaign events over the last month have been in African-American venues, and it's outreach they're certainly looking at. Look, we're going to be talking about Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan quite a bit over the next few months. And for a Democrat to win those states, for Joe Biden to win those states, he's going to have to get 85 to 90% of the African American vote in some of these urban centers like Milwaukee, Philadelphia, and Detroit. So, just like independent suburban women are going to be important for Donald Trump, the African American vote is going to be important for Joe Biden.
So I want to move to a Supreme Court decision from last week. The High Court rejected a challenge to the abortion drug mifepristone, allowing it to stay on the market. The decision was obviously seen as a victory for abortion rights advocates. But Scott, I noticed right after the decision, Vice President Kamala Harris was warning voters to stay in the fight and continuing to call out Trump for what she says is a Trump abortion ban. Do you think this victory from the Supreme Court and similar victories for the abortion rights wing of the Democratic Party could make voters complacent if things are going their way ahead of the election?
I don't think so. I think, the abortion as an issue is going to make it on to the ballot in a few states. Obviously the overturning of Roe v. Wade is still in effect despite some of these rulings. So they're going to still have that battle cry. We're getting, they're getting a lot more data about how these states are treating abortion access and differently is impactful to women's health care. There's plenty to rally around, and I think the Democrats are going to certainly make it a campaign issue this fall. And it is a motivating issue for women 18 to 35, especially, which is, again, another demographic the Democrats are going to need to win if they're going to be successful this fall.
So moving on to another Supreme Court ruling, which overturned a Trump-era ban on bump stock attachments for firearms. Scott, how should each campaign address this issue? Obviously, gun control is a very important issue for Democrats, but this was a Trump-era ban.
Yeah, this is one of those. It's Trump era ban. Supreme Court finally comes around. Obviously, it has to make it through the courts. At the moment, gun safety, gun rights is not a top 3 issue. We're still talking about the immigration and the economy. There could be an unfortunate news event that changes that. I don't see this bump stock issue really, extending into the fall. And it's not something either campaign spending a whole lot of time responding to. It's certainly interesting because it was a Donald Trump reversal or a Donald Trump pushed issue in 2018, and now a Donald Trump appointed Supreme Court overturned it. But by and large, I don't see it being an issue this fall unless some unfortunate news event makes this a top thing everyone's talking about.
So we were just looking at images on the screen there of former President Trump's visit to Capitol Hill last week, and we saw Republicans in those images lining up to show their support. We know that Minority Leader Mitch McConnell shook hands with the former president and pledged to back his presidential run. We know that McConnell has been a very vocal critic of Trump in the past. Can a unified Republican Party be enough, though, to get Trump to the Oval Office? He also has to get those swing voters that are outside of the party. So which matters more?
That was one of the more interesting, surreal meetings, I think, for Donald Trump and some of those Senate Republicans. I remember reading, Mitt Romney was going to initially miss the meeting, and then his flight got delayed, so he showed up. You've got the Mitch McConnell storyline. Look, I think at the end of the day, good politicians, and everyone in that room is a good politician, realizes, friends are better than enemies. Even Donald Trump realizes that. So I think that's why they're all coming together. Some like Donald Trump more than others. Some are just, I think like Mitch McConnell saying, look, this is who the party picks. So this is who I'm going with. But the unity is needed, especially if, and Donald Trump is, a seasoned political veteran now. He knows he needs the House, he needs the Senate. If he wants to, if he's the presidential winner, he's going to need both of them helping him along, because he can't just push things through just because he's Donald Trump.
Another example of Republicans falling in line. So speaking of other Republicans who maybe haven't fell in line so much with Trump, Maryland Republican Senate candidate Larry Hogan got a very unexpected endorsement from the former president. And it was one that he wasn't necessarily hoping he would get, because we know that Hogan has been one of the most vocal Republican critics of Trump. Hogan is currently trailing Democrat Angela Alsobrooks by just under 2%. What impact is Trump's endorsement having on Hogan's chances, and how is Hogan distancing himself from Trump?
I think we can look to answer that question on how Larry Hogan's campaign responded, right? So that endorsement, that comment came out, and I think within 30, 45 minutes, there was a statement from the Larry Hogan campaign pretty much explicitly saying, well, we're not going to endorse Donald Trump. So that tells you what they think of the endorsement. And it is going to be, it appears to be a close race in Maryland, and they're going to need every edge voter to keep it competitive, or at least the Hogan campaign is. So look, that was one of the funnier or more entertaining political interactions in DC last week. And it's pretty clear neither of these two like each other. But again, political expediency. They're going to say what they need to say so that they can get their voters. And for Donald Trump, that's appearing to be nice to Larry Hogan. For Larry Hogan, that's appearing to be distant from him.
What a dynamic, and I'm sure we'll see it play out more as we get closer to November. Scott Tranter from Decision Desk HQ, thank you so much as always.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Will it be an epic debate debacle or the greatest show on earth? President Biden and former President Trump will officially face off on two debate stages, June 27th and September 10th. It's time to wake up, Washington, because voters will be watching these debates closely, and the jabs have already begun. Biden challenged Trump with this video posted to X.
Donald Trump lost 2 debates to me in 2020. And since then, he hadn't shown up for debate. Now he's acting like he wants to debate me again. Well, make my day, pal.
While Trump posted this to Truth Social, quote, "Just tell me when. I'll be there. Let's get ready to rumble." So what are Americans really thinking about these upcoming debates? Here's what some of you had to say.
The bickering, the going back and forth, the slandering and the name calling, that doesn't help anybody.
I have a little bit of dignity about yourself and show some respect, whether you disagree or not.
Bluffs and people playing it safe. I feel like the election is this year, so say what you gotta say.
I would like to see respectful discourse, of course, between Biden and Trump. Fortunately, probably that won't be happening.
I can't be disappointed anymore. It's been a crazy 8 years. We count major with the vote. We can go to the red side or we can go to the blue side. So they need to get themselves together if you plan on having our vote.
Joining us now is a man who has covered many debates over the years. He's also my boss, The Hill's editor-in-chief, Bob Cusack. Bob, it's good to see you.
Hey, Julia.
So, just to start off with, we're expecting fiery debates, knowing that this is going to be a rematch from 2020. We all remember Chris Wallace, when he was at Fox News, not being able to get a word in between Trump and Biden during the first 2020 debate. Let's take a look at that.
Oh, really?
Mr. President, it's an open discussion.
I think you did.
Mr. President,
only guy that
let
did
him
something.
answer.
He stood up.
No,
He stood up,
the answer to
and
the
he
question is no.
threatened Ukraine.
No, sir.
With $1 billion, if you don't
That
get rid
is
of Trump.
absolutely not
Stop.
true.
You're on tape doing it.
You're going to
You're on
have
tape.
True.
Gentlemen. I hate to raise
Chris,
my voice,
he's
but I
on
see it seems
tape.
to be. Why should I be different than the two of you?
And that's Trump. But at one point, Biden actually told former President Trump to shut up. Let's take a look at that.
It's hard to get any word in with this clown. Excuse me, this
Hey,
this
let me just
person.
say,
I'm not going to answer the question
Why
because
would you answer that
because
question?
the question
new Supreme Court justice,
the
radical
question,
left.
Will you
Who
shut
is your,
up, man?
Listen, you're a senator. And
You're
by
the
way,
worst
you were a
president
vice-
America has ever had.
Hey,
Come
Joe,
on.
let me
So, Bob, there's a lot of factors that play into these debates. A lot of it's the moderator. A lot of it's circumstantial as to what the candidates have been through that day. I think the second debate may have been a little bit more on track than the first one. So what can we expect from the first debate in June, but also in September?
Well, it's like a heavyweight boxing fight. They had those matchups in 2020. They're going to have different matchups in 2024. Things have changed. Biden is now president. I think Trump actually lost the presidency in that first debate. I think he was so off the rails that's what cost him the presidency, as well as some things related to COVID, because he could have handled COVID better. And he lost so narrowly. So I do expect fiery debates, but I do think that a lot of people will be in Trump's ear saying you need to calm down, don't go at that pace. And Biden's going to have to, he's going to be on the spot too, because there's concerns about his age and can he keep up with Trump during the debate. Now, certainly in 2020, Biden did well, and I think he won the debates. And this, honestly, could decide the election, these debates.
So on that note about Trump in particular being on the spot, one thing we've always asked those around him, those who support him, the former president gets this asked as well, is whether he will accept the 2024 presidential election results. after what happened in 2020. Is he going to be pressed on that? And how do you think he navigates that?
It's a very good question. I don't think he's going to accept any result if he loses. But on the 2020, this is a tough part for moderators here, because do you want to go down that path? You know what Trump's going to say. He said it a million times. The moderators want to create new material. So I do think it's an open question of whether he's going to accept the 2024 debate results. He certainly did not accept 2020. Remember, in 2016, in the first primary, he lost to Ted Cruz, and he said that was rigged. So there's a pattern here. I don't think the moderators are going to harp on that. I think they want to have most of the topics, at least most of them, going forward instead of backward.
So these debates in the past have been sponsored by the Commission on Presidential Debates.
Yeah.
This year it's different because the Biden campaign went around them, seemed to reach out to the Trump campaign over social media. Then you had the networks getting involved. You know, us politicos know what the Commission on Presidential Debate is, but a lot of Americans outside the Beltway who may not follow politics as closely aren't as aware of what it really did to organize these debates. Talk about what the commission is and really what its absence means going forward.
Well, the commission was set up because you have these rivals who are going to be facing off, and it's been around for decades. Basically a bipartisan commission to set up the rules, so it's fair to both sides. And you're exactly right, Julia. Both sides went around the commission. Trump has been very critical of the commission in 2020. And then Biden also went around the commission. And why did they go around the commission? Well, the commission had clear rules if a third party can qualify for the debate with 15% in the polls and 270 electoral votes. So don't have to be on all the states, but the states that you are on the ballot have to add up to 270, so technically you could win. That doesn't exist anymore because Biden and Trump basically did this side deal, and the commission rules are irrelevant now because this is not through the commission. So I think this was a clear end run around RFK Jr. because he's right around 15%. Yeah. That's his goal, to get in the debates. Harvard-Harris poll recently said 71% of people want third parties in the debate. But is RFK Jr. going to get in any of these debates? Absolutely not, because I'm certain the president would say, nope, I don't want RFK Jr. If RFK Jr. is in it, then I'm out.
One thing Trump has been pushing for is a live audience. We know he likes that spectacle. In 2016, he brought a number of women who had accused Bill Clinton of sexual harassment or misconduct to that debate against Hillary Clinton. It's not the first time. I mean, we will see these debates take place in a television studio, but it's not the first time we've seen this. Biden did it in 2020 against Bernie Sanders during a CNN debate. How will Trump fare without an audience? Because he's someone who really does feed off of the energy around him.
He does, and he's even fed off the negative energy. Back in the 2016 Republican primary debates, there were, remember, Jeb Bush was the front runner at first, and Trump was getting basically booed by some in the stands. And what did he say? He said, oh, they're a bunch of lobbyists, they're from Washington. So he even played off the negative energy. Yeah. So I think it is going to be tough for Trump because he loves that feedback and he loves to make people laugh and people turn against his rival. So that's going to be a little bit of a difference. As you know, Julia, sometimes they say everybody has to be quiet in the crowd, but rarely are they quiet in the crowd.
They're very excited. So I want to draw our attention to issues and how they're going to play out in the debates. You know, a recent ABC Ipsos poll found that 85% of adult Americans surveyed said inflation was an important issue. No surprise there. In a plurality, 44% said they trust former President Trump more than Biden on inflation. Why is that, and what does Biden need to do to gain America's trust back on the issue of inflation and the economy? I mean, it just seems to be this never-ending messaging struggle for him.
I don't think Biden can win because we're less than 6 months away, but he's got to close the gap on those numbers you showed. Listen, inflation has gone up under Biden. You can say certainly that was because of the COVID bills that were passed, trillions of dollars of aid. There were bills that were bipartisan. There were bills that were partisan that just Democrats passed. But I think what Biden needs to do is have a little Bill Clinton in him, where show some empathy. Listen, we've been through some tough times. I understand it. Biden sometimes can be very defensive. He can actually misconstrue what the inflation rate was when he got in, and it really was low, but it did go up under his watch. Again, you can blame the prior administration for that, but facts are fact when they went up. I do think Biden should say, listen, we're on the right track. Things are getting better. Which inflation? It is. The rate has gone down, but I understand your pain. That Bill Clinton message, he hasn't really delivered, and I think he would be wise to deliver that.
Yeah, that'll be interesting to watch for that. I know in a recent CNN interview, he did not.
He did not.
He did not do that. So we'll see what he does there. So inflation obviously isn't the only issue. There's other aspects of the economy, immigration, democracy, crime, safety, healthcare, foreign policy. Obviously, the war in Gaza has been playing a big role domestically. Which of these issues will Trump and Biden hit the hardest when making their case on the debate stage?
Well, Trump loves talking about the border. He loves talking about his wall. So I think he's going to lean into that as well as the economy, because there's the advantage, honestly, on both issues, on both immigration and the economy. But Biden has a big issue in his pocket, and that's abortion. He's going to be talking about that nonstop. We've seen it, and you've reported, and our staff has reported on, even in red states, pro-choice amendments are passing. That is just very shocking. So Democrats have the abortion issue. They did well on that in the midterm elections. Everyone was expecting, including me, a red wave. The red wave didn't happen. Why? Because of abortion. And this is going to be the first presidential where it's really leaned into, and that could save Biden's job. But it may not be enough.
Well, Bob, thank you so much for joining us here today. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Julie.
If you've been following the story of Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito's wife, her spat with a neighbor following the 2020 election, you've likely heard this a few times. That's the bleep universally recognized as a replacement for unsavory language, and it was used in the case to replace a derogatory epithet directed at Mrs. Alito. But who decides which words we bleep and why? Rafael Bernal has an in-depth look at the rules of censorship.
And 52 years ago, comedian George Carlin broke the internet with that list of 7 words you can't say on TV. Of course, there was no internet in 1972, and Carlin didn't say those words on TV. But in 1973, the Pacifica Foundation's New York-based WBAI station broadcast a version of Carlin's routine. A single complaint was filed with the FCC by John Douglas, a board member of a group called Morality in Media. Douglas just happened to tune in to WBAI while driving his 15-year-old son on Tuesday, October 30, 1973. Now, Douglas's outrage at the broadcast kicked off a legal process that ended up in the Supreme Court and helped establish the FCC's definition of obscenity, indecency, and profanity. So, for something to be obscene, it must appeal to the average person's prurient interest, depict or describe sexual conduct in a patently offensive way, and lack serious literary, artistic, political, or scientific value. For a broadcast to be indecent, it can't meet that standard, but it has to portray sexual or excretory organs in a way that is patently offensive. And profanity is just grossly offensive language considered a public nuisance. Now, obscenity is based from any broadcast regulated by the FCC. Indecency and profanity, they're fine between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. on airwaves, but that schedule doesn't apply to subscription services like cable TV and satellite radio. The FCC can revoke broadcasting licenses, impose fines, or issue admonishments and warnings to stations that violate those rules. Now, that hasn't prevented producers from pushing the envelope. In the 1990s, the cop show NYPD Blue was famous for its use of nudity and coarse language. NYPD Blue producer Stephen Bochco wrote in his memoir that he'd negotiated permission for his characters to use the word when the network tried to censor a character from making a particular hand gesture at Sipowicz, one of the main characters, Bochco threatened to have Sipowicz use that word 37 times. They folded and the guy flipped Sipowicz the bird, wrote Bochco. it could get a little silly. Luckily, with social media and online channels self-regulating, things are much more reasonable these days. Okay, fine. Let's accept that the internet can be a little chaotic. Remember that 7-second timer from the top of this video? That's there because YouTube, which recently loosened its swearing policy, limits monetization of videos that use some of Carlin's words in the first 7 seconds. And creators, whether they're big shot TV producers or dance fad TikTokers, they want to get paid. That's made for some strange adjustments to content on some social media platforms. TikTok, for instance, has some of the strictest regulations on violent and hateful content. But almost anyone can flag a post, and moderators have been known to have a heavy hand in pulling down content. And that's led creators to use words like unalive instead of dead or kill, or panini instead of pandemic to avoid triggering misinformation censors. Now, whether it's network TV or the deepest recesses of social media, it's a game of cat and mouse. The FCC's, Douglas Johnson's, content moderators, and community guidelines, they're busy defining what's appropriate and what isn't. But there are always a few Carlins, Botchkos, dance fad content creators out looking to flip the bird or just plain unalive censorship.
That's it for What's America Thinking. I'm Julia Manchester. Come back next week and be sure to like, share, and subscribe to The Hill's YouTube channel.